room went quiet before anyone understood why. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed an announcement or a bell. It arrived suddenly, as if the air itself had been pulled tight. Inside a small but packed arena in Southeast Asia, eyes shifted from the ring to the man standing calmly at its edge. Bruce Lee didn't look like someone about to make history. He looked like someone waiting for confirmation. The challenge had not been loud. It had not been disrespectful. That was what made it unsettling. A Thai fighter had stepped forward, trained in Muay Thai, hardened by full-contact competition, carrying the presence of someone who had fought not just opponents but expectations. The fighter's background didn't fit neatly into the labels people were used to, and because people didn't understand it, they talked. A lot. Some said the challenge was unfair. Others said it was unnecessary. A few said it was dangerous. But Bruce Lee didn't react to any of that. He had never been interested in categories. To him, a fighter was a fighter. Power was power. Timing was timing. And truth revealed itself only when tested. The Thai fighter was known for pressure, forward movement, relentless strikes that broke rhythm and erased confidence. In the ring, this fighter didn't chase opponents. They crowded them, forced mistakes, forced reactions. That style had ended fights quickly, very quickly. Trainers respected it, fighters feared it, spectators loved it. Bruce Lee watched quietly from across the ring. He wasn't measuring muscle. He wasn't studying stance the way most would. He was watching breathing, weight shifts, the pause between movements. Every fighter, no matter how aggressive, revealed themselves in those small gaps, and Bruce Lee lived in gaps. The crowd was divided before the fight even began. Some were curious, some were uncomfortable, many were convinced this was a mistake. Bruce Lee was fast, yes. Brilliant, yes. But this opponent wasn't here to play. This was someone forged in full-contact combat where hesitation meant punishment, where movement invited collision. As Bruce Lee stepped into the ring, there was no music, no performance, just bare feet on canvas and eyes that stayed level. The Thai fighter stood already inside, posture upright, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady. There was no hostility in that gaze, only focus, only readiness. The referee spoke, but few listened. The distance between the two fighters felt heavier than the words filling the space. One represented motion, the other pressure. One had built a philosophy around freedom, the other around dominance. This wasn't just a fight, it was a question waiting to be answered. Bruce Lee shifted once, testing the surface. The Thai fighter didn't move. That stillness spoke volumes. It said patience. It said confidence. It said there would be no chasing today. Bruce Lee nodded slightly, not as acknowledgement but as understanding. This opponent would not rush. This opponent would force him to choose. People expected flash. They expected speed. They expected Bruce Lee to dance. What they didn't expect was how still he became when the moment arrived. He didn't bounce. He didn't faint. He stood balanced, weight-centered, breathing slow. The Thai fighter noticed this immediately. So did the crowd. The bell rang. No one attacked. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 3. The silence grew louder than noise. The Thai fighter stepped forward first, not fast, not slow, just enough to close space. Bruce Lee adjusted, not backward, but slightly offline. The movement was small, but it changed everything. The angle shifted. The ring no longer felt symmetrical. The Thai fighter advanced again, this time closer. Bruce Lee didn't retreat. He rotated. The pressure followed. The crowd leaned forward. This wasn't explosive. This was deliberate. Two fighters testing whose control would break first. Then the Thai fighter struck. Not full power, a probing strike, a message. Bruce Lee moved just enough for it to miss cleanly. No block, no counter, just absence. That absence unsettled something. Aggression feeds on resistance. When it finds none, it hesitates. The Thai fighter adjusted instantly, firing a second strike, then a third. The sound of gloves cutting air echoed through the arena. Bruce Lee slipped each one by margins too small to feel safe. The crowd gasped, not because it was flashy, but because it was precise. Precision is harder to argue with than speed. Still, this couldn't last. Everyone knew that. Pressure always wins eventually. One wrong step, one delayed reaction, that was all it took. The Thai fighter closed distance fully now. No more testing. No more feeling out. The space collapsed. Bruce Lee was where power lived now, where damage happened. And that was when Bruce Lee stopped moving. Just for a moment. Long enough for the crowd to realize something had shifted. Long enough for the Thai fighter to commit. What happened next would not look dramatic in slow motion. It would not feel satisfying to people who loved chaos. But it would change how everyone in that arena understood control. Because Bruce Lee had not been avoiding the fight. He had been preparing the moment. The moment Bruce Lee stopped moving, the energy in the arena shifted. It wasn't obvious at first. Some thought he had misjudged the distance. Others believed fatigue had finally caught up. Stillness in a fight like this usually meant danger. Stillness meant you were about to be hit. The TIE fighter saw it as confirmation. This was the opening. This was where pressure finally broke speed. The advance came without hesitation. Not reckless, not emotional, trained aggression. Years of Muay Thai had taught the fighter how to close space without wasting effort. Elbows stayed tight. Balance stayed grounded. Each step carried intent. The ring felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls themselves were leaning in. Bruce Lee was close enough to feel the air shift as his opponent moved. The first real strike came heavy, not thrown to test, thrown to impose reality. The crowd reacted instantly, a collective intake of breath as the glove cut toward Bruce Lee's center line. This was the punch people had been waiting for, the kind that ended discussions, the kind that made philosophy irrelevant. Bruce Lee moved, not away but inside. It was a decision that made no sense to most eyes watching. Moving inward against power violated instinct. Every combat rule screamed against it, but Bruce Lee wasn't responding to the punch itself. He was responding to the commitment behind it. The TIE fighter's weight shifted forward, hips turning, balance transferring for impact. That transfer created a gap, not in space, but in control. Bruce Lee's body rotated just enough to redirect the line of force. His lead foot adjusted by inches. His shoulder turned. The punch passed close enough to feel dangerous, yet missed cleanly. There was no dramatic dodge, no leap, just alignment changing at the exact moment pressure peaked. The TIE fighter didn't stop. A second strike followed immediately, then a third, this time closer, faster. The sound of contact echoed, but not where expected. Gloves met forearms. Shin brushed thigh. Bruce Lee absorbed nothing directly. Every collision was softened, redirected, turned slightly off its intended path. To the crowd, it looked chaotic. To the fighters, it was chess played at full speed. Pressure increased. The TIE fighter crowded harder now, forcing Bruce Lee toward the edge of the ring. This was familiar territory. This was where fights were finished. Bruce Lee's back neared the ropes. The crowd rose to its feet. This was it. Nowhere left to go. Bruce Lee didn't look behind him. Instead, he lowered his center of gravity slightly. His breathing stayed calm. The TIE fighter launched again, this time with combination strikes designed to overwhelm. Hands high, knees ready. This was power layered on pressure. This was where toughness mattered. Bruce Lee slipped one strike, checked another, then let the third come close enough to draw full commitment. That was the moment he had been waiting for. Not the strike itself, but the belief behind it. The belief that this time, power would land. Bruce Lee stepped in again. Not fast, not slow, timed. His movement cut across the TIE fighter's line, not backward, not sideways, but diagonally through intent. His shoulder brushed past the opponent's chest. His foot planted inside the stance. For a fraction of a second, their balance intersected. And in that intersection, leverage shifted. The strike Bruce Lee delivered didn't look impressive. No wide motion, no visible wind-up. It traveled a short distance and landed precisely where the TIE fighter's structure was weakest in that moment. Not muscle, not bone, balance. The effect was immediate. The TIE fighter's forward pressure vanished. Legs that had driven relentlessly suddenly felt disconnected. The next step didn't go where it was meant to. The upper body followed momentum that no longer existed. Control slipped away, not violently but completely. The crowd reacted in confusion. There was no loud impact, no dramatic fall, just a sudden change in posture. The TIE fighter staggered, trying to reset, trying to regain the pressure that had defined the fight so far. But something fundamental had shifted. The rhythm was gone. Bruce Lee didn't pursue. That unsettled people even more. Fighters chased weakness. That was how fights ended. But Bruce Lee stepped back instead, eyes locked, reading the response. He wasn't trying to finish. He was observing what remained. The TIE fighter attempted to reassert control, stepping forward again, but the movement lacked certainty now. The body hesitated where it hadn't before. The strikes that followed carried power but not confidence. Bruce Lee noticed immediately. Confidence was the real engine behind pressure. Without it, power became loud but slow. Another exchange followed, short, tight. Bruce Lee redirected again, this time adding a brief counter, not to hurt but to confirm. The contact landed cleanly. The TIE fighter's stance wavered. The crowd began to understand. This wasn't about strength failing. It was about structure being taken away. Breathing changed. Shoulders tightened. The TIE fighter adjusted guard instinctively, not aggressively. That instinct revealed more than words ever could. The fight had entered a different phase, one where power was still present but no longer trusted. Bruce Lee stood centered again, exactly where he had been before pressure closed in. Calm, balanced, watching. The TIE fighter circled now, no longer advancing straight forward. The roles had reversed quietly, almost politely. The crowd didn't cheer yet. They were too busy trying to process what they were seeing. This wasn't dominance through force. This was dominance through understanding. The TIE fighter made one more attempt to reclaim momentum, a heavier strike, thrown with intent to end the uncertainty. Bruce Lee responded instantly, not by avoiding but by intercepting. His movement cut timing itself. The strike never reached full extension. The body behind it never finished committing. The effect was subtle but devastating. The TIE fighter froze for half a second, then stepped back involuntarily, not knocked down, not hurt, but interrupted at the deepest level of control. That interruption echoed louder than any knockout. The referee watched closely now. So did the corners. So did the crowd. Everyone could feel that the fight was reaching a conclusion without spectacle. Because the question that had brought them here had already been answered. And Bruce Lee hadn't needed power to do it. The referee had stepped closer without realizing it. That alone said enough. Fights were usually judged by damage, by visible harm, by collapse. This one was being judged by something harder to name. Control had shifted, and everyone inside the arena could feel it. The TIE fighter stood upright, still dangerous, still powerful, but no longer certain. Certainty had been taken quietly, without force. The crowd noticed the change in breathing first. The steady rhythm that had driven forward pressure earlier was gone. In its place was a sharper inhale, a shorter exhale, small signs easily missed. Bruce Lee missed none of them. He adjusted his stance slightly, not to attack but to remain available. He wasn't chasing an ending. He was allowing the truth of the exchange to finish speaking. The TIE fighter circled again, searching for an angle that felt familiar. Nothing did. Every step forward now came with hesitation, every strike preceded by a question. Was the distance right? Would the opening still be there? Bruce Lee answered those questions before they fully formed, not with strikes but with positioning. He was always just close enough to threaten, just far enough to deny. Another exchange unfolded, short, restrained, careful. The TIE fighter attempted to reassert authority with a heavier combination, hoping volume might replace certainty. Bruce Lee met it with interception, not collision. Forearms guided gloves away from center line. Footwork erased angles before they developed. The power was still present, but it had nowhere clean to go. The referee's eyes moved between the two fighters, searching for a moment that would justify intervention. There was no knockdown, no obvious injury, and yet the imbalance was unmistakable. One fighter was working harder for less result. The other was doing less and controlling more. Bruce Lee stepped in once more, not to strike but to close the conversation. His movement was economical, deliberate, almost restrained. He disrupted the TIE fighter's stance again, this time without contact heavy enough to draw attention. The effect was immediate. Balance faltered. Recovery lagged. The attempt to recenter failed. That was when the referee made the decision. He stepped between them, raising a hand. The bell hadn't rung. The crowd didn't react at first. Stoppages usually came with impact, with spectacle. This one came with understanding. The TIE fighter looked toward the referee, then back at Bruce Lee. There was no protest, no frustration, only recognition. The fight was called. Not because someone had been hurt, but because the outcome was no longer in doubt. The arena filled with sound slowly, like people remembering how to breathe again. Some applauded. Some stayed silent. Many simply stared, trying to replay moments that hadn't looked dramatic enough to explain what they felt. Cameras rushed forward, hungry for reactions that wouldn't come easily. Bruce Lee stepped back, hands lowered, expression unchanged. He offered no celebration, no gesture of dominance. The TIE fighter removed gloves calmly, nodding once, not in defeat but in respect. It was a nod exchanged between people who understood something together that others would take much longer to grasp. Later, when asked what had happened, the TIE fighter didn't talk about speed or size. There was no mention of labels, no explanation rooted in identity. Instead, there was a simple observation. Pressure only works when the other person accepts it, and Bruce Lee never did. Bruce Lee spoke even less. He didn't describe techniques or moments. He spoke about alignment, about how force requires cooperation to succeed, about how power, when committed without awareness, creates openings instead of endings. He said the fight had never been about winning. It had been about testing a question honestly. That question lingered long after the ring emptied. People came expecting to see strength challenged by speed. What they saw instead was strength outpaced by understanding. The TIE fighter hadn't been overpowered. They had been redirected. Their intent had been used against itself. The fight hadn't ended with violence. It ended with clarity. In the days that followed, opinions clashed louder than punches ever had. Some argued the stoppage was premature. Others said it was inevitable. But even the loudest critics struggled to explain why the TIE fighter, so dominant at the start, had faded without visible damage. The answer was uncomfortable, because it suggested that power alone was not enough. That night didn't erase the importance of strength. It reframed it. Strength mattered, but only when paired with control. Aggression mattered, but only when guided. And speed, when connected to timing, didn't just evade power. It decided whether power could exist at all. Bruce Lee walked away from the event without headlines, without declarations. He had never needed them. The legacy wasn't built on moments that looked impressive in isolation. It was built on moments that quietly changed how people thought. This was one of those moments. Not remembered for who was bigger. Not remembered for who was stronger. But remembered for who understood the fight before it happened. And that understanding remained long after the noise faded.